Hey guys, okay, so I'm going to do chapter 14 right now. It's the evolution of biological diversity. Um, so kind of continuing from the last lecture that I did. Go ahead and share my screen real quick. Okay, give me a second to set this up. All right. I can type. Okay. So I'm going to give you some vocabulary. Try to keep this lecture fairly short, but pretty sure I gave you the vocabulary for species in the past, but I don't actually remember at this point, to be honest. I'm going to give it to you again. I may have worded it slightly different if I gave this to you in the past. But again, it's a group of individuals or even group of populations whose members can successfully reproduce. And I remember that in evolution, successful reproduction means that the offspring are fertile and that they also live to reproduce and pass on their genes. Okay. And then we have this something called speciation. Pretty straightforward. You have one species that can split into two or more species. And this can happen because of any type of reproductive barrier that a species can encounter. So there's like a type of chipmunk, I think this is in your text, that before the Grand Canyon, became a canyon, um, they were all one species. But as the canyon formed, it physically isolated the one group of the species from the other group. And over time, they became two different species because of natural selection in their respective environments. And so even though they had originally all been from the same species, they are now different enough that they cannot successfully reproduce. So if two individuals of a closely related species cannot interbreed successfully, then they are in fact different species. Hopefully that made sense. Even if they look like two chipmunks that are exactly the same, if they cannot successfully reproduce, then they're not the same species. Okay? So again, speciation can take place because of reproductive barriers. Also, pretty much what it sounds like. Okay? Anything that prevents individuals from closely related species from successfully interbreeding. In the example I just gave you, it was the formation of a canyon. So it was a geographical barrier that prevented them from mating. Species on islands, this is, a very easily observed things with different species on island chains versus on mainland because they have been reproductively isolated from the main population, and over time they have become an entirely different species. Okay, so there's two different types of reproductive barriers. The first is called a prezygotic. A prezygotic barrier is supposed to prevent either mating or fertilization. So before a zygote is formed is what that means. Okay, and we have types of this. So one type, I'm going to go through it pretty quick, is temporal isolation. Temporal isolation is really referring to mating season. So it's time. They're isolated by time, in this case, when they each mate. So even if two closely related species live in the same habitat and have access to each other, if their mating seasons are different, they will not ever mate because the timing will never be right for one of them, okay? Then we have habitat isolation. Quite simply, they live in different habitats so that physically they don't cross over. They don't come in contact with each other. Behavioral isolation. This refers to like mating behaviors. So you remember I showed you a bird of paradise and how it puffs up those feathers and looks like it has those glowing eyes on its back. It's really pretty. But, you know, while that may attract other female birds of prey, birds of paradise, closely related species can look at that and be like, that's the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. I don't want to have children with that. And so those mating behaviors don't call to other species. They've been evolved to call to that specific species. Mechanical isolation. Mechanical isolation simply means, to put it very bluntly, the parts don't match up. And by parts, I mean those parts, reproductive parts. You know, in an exaggerated version, you could, you know, imagine the difficulty between a giraffe and a zebra. And that just has to do with the height and body difference. But yeah, okay. And then finally, we have something called gametic isolation. And the thing with gametic isolation is this happens if mating occurs. Okay, so if all of these other four barriers have been overcome and mating occurs between closely related species, gametic isolation means that the egg and the sperm aren't compatible with each other, so that the sperm can't fertilize the egg regardless of whether it's present or not, which prevents any reproduction from taking place. Okay. All right. We have pre-zygotic. You can imagine we also have post-zygotic. So this comes into play if all pre-zygotic barriers are overcome, including gametic isolation. Okay. If all the pre-zygotic barriers are overcome and two different species successfully mate and then reproduce, we've got some stuff in play there that will prevent a new species from being formed. The first one of those is something called hybrid viability. So this just means that if offspring occur from two different species, the offspring are underdeveloped or don't live long enough to reproduce. Okay, remember that by evolution standards, that's a fail. Then we have reduced hybrid fertility, which just simply means that offspring fail. They can't have offspring. Okay, and then finally we have something called hybrid breakdown. Hybrid breakdown is interesting, and it's something, sorry guys, there's an interruption real quick. Let me go back to the whiteboard here. Okay, so it's talking about hybrid breakdown, and that this is only seen in plants. And the reason for that is just because animals are too complex to have the type of genetic change happen that is required for hybrid breakdown. So basically what happens is the first generation offspring of plants are fertile, okay? And they can reproduce. But the second generation is sterile, okay? So you only get one fertile generation, but then after that, it breaks down and they can't reproduce anymore. And again, that only happens in plants because in order for that type of genetic change to take place, it's happening basically in one generation for it to change that much that they can't interbreed anymore. And so really only plants, and really only plants is what we're going to be looking at with this. It takes animals much longer for that type of genetic change to take place, not just in a single generation. Okay, a couple more vocabulary words. Okay, so there's two different types of speciation events. Allopatric speciation, which means essentially different country. And this is where speciation takes place because of a geographic barrier. So like what did I say, chipmunks in the beginning. Okay, so something that physically comes up to disrupt population from being able to mix with each other. The opposite of that is sympatric speciation, which means same country. And this is also something that you're only going to see in plants. Again, for the same type of reason that the change genetically that has to happen in order for them to suddenly not be able to interbreed from one generation to the next, that's something that can happen that quickly in plants, but animals are too complex to have that type of an overnight shift, if you will. Usually something called polyploidy is responsible for this. Individuals who are polyploid individuals of a species have more than 2 complete sets of chromosomes. Hang on, let me rephrase that. Okay. So more than 2 complete sets. And when that happens, they can't reproduce. All right, let me show you something about hybrids now. Actually, let me even go back in my notes a minute to pull up something. Give me 1 second, guys. What chapter is that? I want to show you. There we go. Do you remember when we did the whole thing on haploid and diploid? Diploid's the total number of chromosomes, haploid half the number, and that sperm and egg cells have to have the haploid number. So let me write out the examples I had again. So I had a pea plant, and their diploid number is 14. And then I had a tiger, 38, a mouse, 40, and then I have humans, carp. Okay, so this is the diploid number. For just a second, I want you to take a look at the diploid numbers of these different species and tell me what you notice about the numbers themselves. You should notice that they're even. They're all even numbers. Because then when we split them in half, 7, what is this, 19? 20. Okay? When you split them in half, then when you have an egg that has 7 and a sperm that has 7, they come together to make the diploid number. So the problem with hybrids is hybrids tend to have an odd number of chromosomes, which you can't split in half, not evenly as a whole number. So because of that, they can't reproduce, okay? Because there's too many and an odd number for them to be able to reproduce with each other or with the original parent generation, okay? Let me share this now. Okay. Let me introduce you to some hybrids. This is a liger. I was thinking Napoleon Dynamite. I know that was way before your time, most of you, but just think about Napoleon Dynamite. It's pretty much my favorite animal. So a liger, notice, is the combination of a male lion and a female tiger. And this is important. The combination is important. As you'll see in the image just below this, when I get to it, you can swap that and have a male tiger and a female lion, and you get a different outcome. So ligers are massive, over 904 pounds. I'm reading from here. Hercules is the largest non-obese liger and weighs 904 pounds. I think Hercules is still alive, but I'm actually not 100% sure. The reason that they get so big is because female lions have a gene that inhibits the growth so that male lions only get so big. But when the female lion isn't bred with the male, that gene for growth was uninhibited in the male lion. And so they can get massive, and they do get massive because that gene isn't present in a tiger. So there's lots of pictures of Hercules with his owner slash person, whatever she is, on the internet, and you can get a better view of him, including him standing up. He's huge. There used to be a liger on display. He was stuffed liger on display at one of the science museums on the campus of BYU. If you're ever that way and think that you just need to go see a liger. Okay, so here's the opposite. This is what I was saying was the male tiger and the female lion, so we reversed which was which, and you get something called a tigon. A tigon is much smaller than a liger, and again, that's because of that gene in the female lion that reduces growth or puts a cap on growth. And then you'll see that there's also kind of a modified mane for a tigon, and you have more of the tiger markings that are a little more prominent but this is a much smaller cat when compared to the massive liger. A zonkey. Yep, they have zonkies. Pretty sure they were zonkies at some random truck stop between St. George and, is it Beaver? Somewhere between St. George and Salt Lake, they have these on display, if you will, and you can go in and feed a zonkey, which is a mix between a zebra and a donkey, and they're a little bit funky looking. This is a baby, so it's kind of cute, but they tend to have long, spindly legs and that just don't look quite right for its body. But there's a variety of mixes, usually called zebroids, that you can mix. You can do like a horse and a zebra, donkey and a zebra. There's a couple of others that when you mix, they're all types of zebroids. This is my favorite. I require one for a pet immediately, but you know, only if it's not going to go all Tiger King on me. They're flipping gorgeous. A Jaglion, male jaguar and a female lion. They're interesting because they kind of, this one at least is a beautiful representation, but they can look like a stealth lion in that they have the markings, but it's in like they have this black overcoat on top of them. They're just gorgeous. And this one, again, note that there is an importance between what happens, you know, which is the sperm donor and which is an egg donor. So in this case, it's the male jaguar that needs to donate to get this combination that creates this Jaglion. Some lesser known combinations, a geep, there you go, a goat and a sheep. I'm just gonna pass on that one, no thank you. A roller bear. This is a polar bear and a brown bear mixed. They have an interesting combination. Their coat color is pretty unique. Oh, and yes, they are also called Paisley bears. Instead for like polar and grizzly. Anyway, Paisley bear. A coy wolf, coyote and a wolf. Here's another type of zebroid. This one looks like it was probably mixed with, a horse. Savannah cat, so Savannah cats are really interesting. I went down a rabbit hole once, looking up exactly how you get a Savannah cat. I won't go into all of the details, but you do take your domesticated kitty and a smaller wild cat called a serval, and you mix them, you breed them. And it's interesting because I believe it's on the male side. It's like the first 7 generations of males that are produced from a domestic cat serval mix are sterile. So they can't be used to bred. Somewhere around that 7th generation, if I recall correctly, check my facts, they actually become capable of reproducing, and then you can breed them with another Savannah cat. The females, it seems, are the opposite. They, I believe, are breedable immediately, but then I want to say that that fades out after a few generations. Their cost, they're very expensive depending on the generation of cat that you get. If you find that your cat will never breed other Savannah cats, then I believe they're less expensive. But if you want a breeding cat or, you know, one of those types of generations, then they become more expensive. Savannah cats are said to have the personality more of a dog. They can learn basic tricks. They respond to their name. They, you know, I think they can still be taught how to use a litter box and stuff like that. But they're also supposed to have really, what am I going to say, very selective natures. They either like you or they don't. And I've known 1 or 2 people that have had them. And they basically say that if they don't like you and you're their owner, you're kind of screwed. So, because, you know, it's a cat. I love cats, I do. But if they don't like you, that's kind of a problem for you. Now, this one's just the size of a dog and doesn't like you. So, anyway, but they're very smart. A wolfen. A false killer whale, male, and a female bottlenose will give you this combination called a wolfen. Beefalo, self-explanatory. It is a buffalo with a cow. There you go. They were interbred because they're hardier, provide more meat, what have you. According to this, it's believed that only 4 wild buffalo herds exist that aren't contaminated by any cow genes. So in other words, 4 wild buffalo herds that are what buffalo would have been a couple hundred years ago. And I actually think one of those herds is up there on the backside of Zion National Park. Okay, then you have the hinny. The hinny, you need to have a female donkey and a male horse. And they look like this. They are compact, they're short, their legs are short, the face is very long and slender. The opposite of this, where you have a male donkey and a female horse, is your mule, okay? And whereas hinnies aren't super helpful, mules are extremely helpful because of their build that you get. They are excellent pack animals. They have very sure footing and very good endurance. But again, they're a hybrid, which means you can't take a boy mule and a girl mule and breed them and get more mules. Every time you want a mule, you have to breed a male donkey and a female horse. Okay? Narwhal and beluga. The narluga, that's just a fun word to say. The camel llama, the camel. I'm going to say no to that too. Both spitting animals, and no. The zoe, cow plus a wild yak. Looks like something Disney drew. Leopon, male leopard and a female lion. Got some of the mane there. A mallard, and a muscovy duck. I actually don't know much about the muscovy duck, or is it Muscovy? See, look, I'm even like saying it how I feel like saying it because I don't know what it is. Muscovy, Muscovy, muscovy. It's probably not muscovy because there's no O at the end. Feel free to look it up. Zubron, a cow, mixed with the European bison. Cute-ish. Ish? Okay, so there you go. By far my favorite is the Jaglion. By far the most useful is the mule. And of course, one of the most famous is the liger. So there's some information about hybrids. We have talked a little bit about the fact that we call wolf and dog offspring hybrids, but I think I did cover it, I think, and talking about how domesticated dogs are a subspecies of wolf, meaning that they are technically the same species and therefore have the ability to reproduce without having issues. And so they're not a hybrid in the pure sense of the term because wolf-dog hybrids are perfectly fertile and capable of reproducing. Okay. Okay, that's it on this chapter, and I will see you soon.